Welcome to the Reclaim app, where we're creating safe spaces of connection with God, each other, and ourselves. Hello and New Year's blessings, friends. We are so grateful that you're here with us in 2024. Hello, Liz. How are you on the other side of the screen? I hope you're staying warm. It is so cold here today. We woke up to minus 40 degrees Celsius with a wind chill of minus 49. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it is extremely cold.
I think it's like in the minus 20s, hey? I
Yeah,
think, yeah.
I think you're right. Yes, it's cold and
It-
schools have been canceled. So we're not only having to, usually it's my dog that barks that interrupts us, but now we also have kids at home to attend to. So we'll see how this goes. But it is good to be able to connect. Thank you for technology that we can stay warm with our tea and
Yes.
blankets and still
Yes.
have this conversation. Awesome. So, for those of you who might be listening for the first time, I'm Carrie and the founder of Reclaim app, which isn't an app yet, but we are confident it will be this year. Our intention is to create calm and safe spaces of connection with God, our neighbors, and ourselves. And I'm an ordained pastor and trained yoga teacher. My lovely friend and co podcaster, Liz, is a compassionate counseling therapist, working both in private practice and the public sphere. And our podcast aims to combine Christian spirituality with mental health and life strategies that aid in connection. In our professions, we get asked a lot of questions, often from people seeking advice. So today we're going to have a conversation around giving and receiving advice, looking at the best and worst advice we've ever received, answering some of your questions, and providing some strategies with the hope of creating clearer and calmer communication. Are you ready to dive in, Liz?
Yes, ma'am. Because advice of all colors, textures, and relative degrees of helpfulness is like kicking around us throughout our day, right? Whether you're looking at it on social media or verbally hearing it from someone in your life, we can hear things from like, don't make assumptions, live according to your values, don't lick outdoor metal poles in the winter. Thank you, movie Christmas Story from 1983 for that one. Read a lot, carpe diem, never eat yellow snow. So I'm just curious if any of this advice resonates with you, Carrie.
Oh, yes, Liz. I think the not eating yellow snow, that's a good one. It's actually really amazing how much of our life is made up of advice, little
Yeah.
sayings that form our thoughts, our perceptions, and even our actions.
Yes. And like depending on where we're at any given like present moment,
Mhm.
advice can land like positively, it can land negatively, or honestly just neutrally on our ears. So as a quick exercise, like if each of us could look back on our past and choose one major event we experienced, I'd be curious how the following pieces of advice would have been helpful, unhelpful, or maybe not even applicable at all at the time. Advice like just stop worrying, walk away, just say yes, keep emotion out of it, fake it till you make it. You can rest when you're dead. So, as Carrie mentioned, she and I are responding to a few advice questions we've been asked in our careers. But before we go there, I'm wondering, as you, Carrie, look back over your life, what's an example of one of the worst pieces of advice you've heard?
Liz, as I was thinking about this, I was pleasantly surprised to find that I couldn't come up with a lot of bad advice. So either I've completely blocked that out of my mind as a survival mechanism, or I've just been very fortunate because
Mhm.
there is a lot of unhelpful advice given throughout our lifetime. The
Wow.
one that stands out to me happened about 8 years ago around my brother's passing. He was killed in a motorcycle accident, and it was a shock and a very traumatic loss for me and my family. And just weeks after he passed, a woman from church came up to me and took me by the arms and squeezed me and said, "One day you will see the blessing in this." Well, I smiled politely, but inside I was just screaming.
Kept those thoughts
Around,
to yourself.
yes. Around the same time, I was also reminded by a fellow Christian that there's no need to cry when our loved ones pass because they're in a better place.
Goodness.
Once again, I smiled politely, but inside I was just bawling. And I firmly believe that God was crying with me too.
Mm,
Now, each of these people meant well. Their intentions were good. They thought that they were comforting me. They were trying to help in what felt like an impossible situation. But just a squeeze, a comforting look, or a shared tear would have been much more helpful than any words of advice or platitudes in those moments.
mm.
How about you, Liz? What is the worst advice or least helpful advice that you've ever received?
Yeah, you brought up a good one for yourself. Like can I just say you choosing to smile politely was probably one of the best responses for that moment because it's okay not to address unhelpful advice every time we encounter it, as we may not always have like the emotional bandwidth to try to explain why certain words of advice aren't welcome in that moment. We might not even know why it isn't helpful. We just know in our bodies it's like, oh, thank you. So for me, something that over time wasn't helpful, but when I first started hearing these words, they seemed aligned with my values as a Christian growing up in the 1990s, were the words burn out for Jesus. It was like this like battle cry I'd hear at youth rallies and read in teen magazines for Christians. So while the heart behind these words was to communicate, give your all to Jesus, for someone like me who didn't understand much about boundaries, it led to this idea that working ourselves to the bone was for Jesus was the goal. And ironically, this piece of advice, which shaped me in my teens, followed me into my adult years and led to a very real experience of burnout in my late 20s. So now I choose to receive like the heart behind this advice, while also acknowledging the gift of my limitations. And my limitations are a gift. So on the other hand, for you, Carrie, I'm curious what one of the best pieces of advice you've received.
Hmm. Oh, Liz, I appreciate you sharing that because I'm sure the pressure to push through and give your
Mm,
all without boundaries resonates with a lot of our listeners. And I love the grace in receiving the heart behind the advice
mm.
while also knowing yourself and what does and doesn't serve you in any given situation. But the grace, that's that can be tough in certain
Yeah.
situations. So I appreciate you naming that. For me, without hesitation, the best advice I've ever received is that no, N-O, is a full sentence,
Mm,
complete sentence, full stop. Now, when I first heard this advice, I laughed and brushed it off as a bit of a joke or a nice thought. 3.5 years ago, I was not in a place to receive this advice and could not see how it would be lived out, at least not without disappointing and maybe hurting a lot of people. As someone who serves and cares for others as a profession, as well as in my personal life as mother, wife, daughter, sister, friend, no has not been part of my vocabulary until I got sick, and then it had to be. And with the help of my counselor, today I can honestly say that no is a complete sentence, full stop.
mm.
Now, this doesn't mean we just say no to everything we don't like to do or don't want to do, but it does mean that we answer people's requests with intention and thoughtfulness for everyone's needs, including our own.
Wow.
So, how about you, Liz? What's the best advice you've ever received?
I was just thinking like of your husband Jay being like, honey, could you pick up some milk? No. Like I'm trying to practice no.
Exactly.
What else is going on here for you with the question? So good, Carrie. Thanks for sharing. So for me, while never eat yellow snow has served me well throughout Canadian winters, I'd have to say one of the best pieces of advice I've received and words of advice I speak often is two or more things can be true at the same time. Because in our polarized world and as a follower of Jesus, I've experienced feeling very boxed into explaining which side of like any given coin I land on when it comes to like any topic, whether it's like a controversial topic or not. And when I was younger, I felt like if I doubted anything or was wrestling through something in my Christian beliefs, or if I didn't have a reasonably articulated response to some of the like really big theological questions, which were very common and still are, like if God is so good or if God exists, why is there suffering in the world? I was somehow this like very fragile Christian who could potentially jeopardize someone else's faith or salvation if I didn't convince them of like a particular position. So I
Mm.
sometimes felt so much pressure as a young teenager, and most of it was my own internal pressure I placed on myself, if I'm being honest. But I didn't know how to leave room for mystery within like the grappling, within the wrestling. So reminding myself that two or more things can be true at the same time has personally helped me acknowledge I can love Jesus and I can also wrestle with questions. I can live in a world that is groaning under so much pain and so much pressure and still be a woman of hope. So
Mm.
holding tension like this has helped release much of the pressure because of those anxious thoughts I used to internally experience, especially as someone who's been in positions of leadership, like being a pastor and now being a counseling therapist, where I could be and have been positioned to be someone who must always have the answers people are seeking. So it really has freed me up, Carrie, to enter more into the tension of unknowing and mystery, which are part of being in relationship with God and one another. And
Mm.
so, while I don't live in regret over that, I do wish someone had spoken this over my young mind, because I think it would have helped me breathe a lot more easily at that stage of my life. Yeah.
Oh, amen. Yes, Livs, I love this. Being able to live in the tension is not easy, but it is what Carl Jung calls one of our most valuable spiritual possessions.
Mhm.
Writing only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. I just feel like that's what you shared with us now. You also reminded me of Brene Brown's work. She looks at this idea of paradox, and she defines it as the appearance of contradiction between two related components. Although light and darkness seem to be opposites, you can't have one without the other. The opposing elements of a paradox are inextricably linked. Even though the elements seem contradictory, they actually complement and inform each other in ways that allow us to discover underlying truths about ourselves and the world. And Liz, I would add God.
Mhm.
She also notes that embracing the paradox, as you've mentioned in your story, teaches us how to think deeper and with more complexity. It invites us to reality check and move away from oversimplifying systems, organizations, or human work. Liz, I'm wondering, how do you see the paradox play out in your role as counselor and with those you sit with?
Yeah, for sure shows up every session.
I bet.
So even just having two different people come together, hey? So as
Right.
a counseling therapist, part of my role is to help clients enter both the gift and the tension of self-discovery as they navigate life transitions, whether it's like they just got married or they're about to have a child or leave a career, boundaries, relationship conflicts, or unresolved wounds or trauma from their past or even like their recent present, right? So,
Mm.
yes, there are times I do give words of advice, and especially when I am very concerned that they're in a difficult situation where they need to find safety. So,
Mm.
more so in context like abuse, hey? Or when they're so overwhelmed, their thoughts are jumbled and they're experiencing a lot of brain fog. And they might not be in a place yet to know which is the best way to go at the time. So I might be more apt to give some advice.
Mm.
But for the most part, I'm still very, very tentative with speaking words of advice, as what would work best for me in a similar situation may not be what's best for them.
Mm.
It's good for us to remind ourselves, and not just for those of us who are in like professional helping roles, but just as humans, to remind ourselves when we're listening to someone and wanting to be helpful,
Mm.
that we aren't the ones who have to live with the decision if the advice given is acted upon.
Mm.
They are. Am I offering advice based off of my family, living, economic, faith, and value systems, or am I sincerely doing my best to enter the other person's world and seeking their good?
Mm.
So I also try to be mindful to present my words of advice as one option among others. So clients aren't being positioned to feel like they should do what I would do if I were in their position. I actually really like brainstorming with clients because they have strengths and gifts and resources available to them that we've talked about too. So I do prefer brainstorming ideas with someone versus offering one piece of advice, especially as a counseling therapist. And you might relate to this, Carrie, in your role, is that there is a power differential between a client and myself. So my words may hold more power than I even realize at any given moment. So advice or guidance, while a very important part of working through many life questions, decisions, and situations we daily face, ideally should support someone in their ongoing work of discovery. So
Beautiful.
that's kind of how I navigate that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious for you, Carrie, like what has been your experience as a pastor when it comes to how you navigate words of advice for those who seek you out for help? You know, people are coming to you for spiritual guidance, hey,
Right.
along with like life choices and decisions.
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting how the role of pastor, I think throughout history, has really sort of had that connotation. That's the person you go to seek advice, spiritual and life advice. Although I would say that has greatly shifted. I'm not sure how true that still is today. Um, we've talked a little bit about this in other episodes, how in times of crisis, the church was often the place people would go to. And we're not seeing that as much in our world today. But certainly within the local congregation that I served, it was my experience and privilege to sit with people during both their celebrations as well as devastations. But I never saw that as a space to give advice, perhaps guidance. I like the word guidance a little bit better. For example, guidance with wedding or funeral preparations, resources for food, shelter, mental health, maybe reading materials, connections to small groups or Bible studies. So, certainly a guidance in some of those areas. And now I think it's important to note any and all of that would have been initiated first and foremost by sitting down with the person and listening to their story and really having a good sense of what the needs are for this particular situation. And then discerning whether it was our community that were the people to help or whether there would be a better fit through another avenue. So that's a lot of how sort of the advice guidance played out. But the words I prefer to use would be presence and comfort. Um, I'm hoping that those words would more accurately describe the role I often find myself in as pastor, being with another as a tangible extension of God with us, a gentle reminder that we're not alone in anything that we go through, and learning to live together in this tension that we're talking about, this paradox. Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. And I appreciate a lot about what you've said about not having all the answers. As a pastor, there have been times when the pressure to say the right thing or give the right answer felt very heavy. Learning to release this and engage in questions, wrestling, discernment together in community, I have found to be a beautiful way, not only to have hard conversations, but to sit together in the hard stuff respectfully. I think Brene names this being stewards of each other's stories.
Okay, yeah.
I just love that. So, not seeking to be right, but seeking a deeper relationship with God, each other, and ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Embracing the paradox.
I love that, Carrie. Not seeking to be right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it's not in our notes. I'm like wanting to respond so much to this, but I love that. I really picking up and you knowing what I know about you, Carrie, is you're also discerning when you're sitting with people. Like when is the time to maybe speak that word that
Right.
might be helpful for them, but also recognizing you're entering their world and helping people kind of discover the answers. Hey,
Yeah,
beautiful.
exactly.
I always go to that idea of like, it's like, how do I help someone do their homework without doing the homework for them?
Ah, that's good.
And
Yes.
I think of the context, like you and I grew up in similar generations where even how we do math back then is different actually than how kids are being trained to do math. You come up with the same answer because it's a pure science,
Yeah.
but how like my nephew comes up with an answer for math, for like adding or subtract or whatever, like math's done differently today. It's different than me. So I could actually be advising him the wrong way that he's being taught in school, right? So it's kind of
Yeah.
that idea, right?
Yeah.
Is not doing the homework for someone. Anyways.
Perfect.
So, Carrie, I'd like to kick off our first advice column episode by going actually back to your response to the best piece of advice you received, which is no is a complete sentence. So I'm curious, when you first heard that, did you experience a wrestle with that advice? And how have these words shaped how you live today?
Yes. No is a complete sentence. I think we just need to keep saying that so that it really resonates. This continues to be a place of wrestle because we're not only saying no, but we're saying no without giving an explanation. Oh, I'm just going to stop because there's a beeping behind me. My daughter's phone watch was going off. Okay, I'm just going to start that part again. No is a complete sentence. I feel like we just need to keep saying that to really ingrain that into our thinking. This does continue to be a place of wrestle for me, Liz, because it's not only saying no, but it's saying no without giving an explanation. And that's the part I find so hard, not having to explain myself away as to why I have to say no, somehow making everybody feel better. And I think for the most part, that does stem from not wanting to disappoint people, my inability to say no. And so, in order to really allow this truth to shape my life, I've had to realize that I was operating out of a place of perfectionism. And I've shared that in other episodes. Perfectionism is not the same as striving for excellence or having a good work ethic. Perfectionism is rooted in wanting to please people and avoid shame. And so, saying no from that place feels impossible. And one of the strategies that has helped me discern when it's appropriate and even necessary to say no is what's called the delay strategy. This was introduced to me by my counselor. The delay strategy means that when you are asked to do something or commit to something, don't initially respond. Even if you know you're going to say yes, take 24 hours or up to 72 hours to give a response. Let the person know that you're not able to answer at this time, but that you intend to get back to them within the next day or two. This gives you time to assess whether the request is feasible and if it's the right time to say yes or no. Again, this isn't easy. This takes a lot of practice, but I have found it very helpful, and it's also been received well by other people, most people. Yeah. So I would just really encourage people. This does feel hard and probably impossible in some situations, but I would just encourage people to try and to keep trying.
And can I just interrupt gently here is
Yeah.
like if that's been your norm for so much of your life, your brain is hardwired a certain way.
Yeah.
So it's actually when you start to speak a different language to your conscious brain. No, not yet, not now. Because not now, not yet might not mean no long term, as you're saying, the delayed response.
That's
But
right.
it's actually helping to I'll just say rewire your brain for new language too, that this is actually an option now that maybe you didn't realize you had before because of that fear and shame.
Yeah. And that's such a good
That doesn't
point.
happen overnight.
No, and it is such a good point because it is very difficult at first. All I can say is that the more you practice, it does get easier, more natural, and just you won't even have to use the delay strategy as often because it becomes a more natural response. You start to know. Yeah. Awesome. So, Liz, I'm curious. It's been a little bit, but we did put this question out on our socials. What would you want to ask a pastor or counselor? And I'm just curious what responses we got.
Yeah, so we did get some good questions, and I'm going to address one today. Someone DM'd the question, how do you deal with anger? And they wrote, like, my anger just ignites. I do create space to count to 10, but if I'm on autopilot, I'm not thinking I am going to get angry. so I should count to 10. I'm adding a bit of the tone there because it was written. And it's such a good point, right? So this is a great question for a few reasons. Questions around anger are actually quite common in the work that I get to do. And so I can assume it might connect with even just one of our listeners today. But I also appreciate the question because it speaks to a desire to want to respond in healthier ways and not allow emotion to build up so much that we feel we're losing control, particularly around an uncomfortable emotion like anger. So having that growth mindset is very helpful in navigating uncomfortable emotions like anger and will help decrease the shame around it. So for those who listen to episode 14 of this podcast, The Wisdom of Emotions, you'll know I don't align with the concept that emotions should be categorized into negative or positive boxes. What you feel is what you feel. Anger is not a negative emotion. It's an emotion all of us feel to varying degrees, right? So while anger can lead to negative behaviors and consequences, the existence of anger as an emotion you feel is not a negative thing. So our emotions, whether you're feeling angry or grief, surprised or content, are communicating something to us. Emotions are valuable sources of information about our values. So while today's episode doesn't provide the needed space to delve far into this, that's why episode 14 is a good one to check out. I do want to offer a few exercises to help de-escalate the intensity of anger you may feel in your body. So essentially, we experience anger as a response to something happening to us or to someone else, and it can be a friend or a foe. So anger communicates this isn't right or this isn't just. What would need to be worked through in a very intentional way is whether your interpretation is grounded in truth or grounded in your opinion. So that's where I would encourage anyone listening who may be wrestling with chronic anger or unresolved anger to talk with someone who is trained to help you name where your anger is rooted and provide skills for you to manage anger. So it helps you live out your values in a healthier way. So your current experience of anger can have roots in like unresolved wounds, insecurities, fears, unresolved grief. So there's no one clear answer, which is why I can't do a dive into it. I actually need to sit with this person and do a process with them. So remember, anger isn't bad. We read in Mark chapter 3 in the Bible that Jesus felt angry and deeply distressed when he was going to heal a man's shriveled hand on the Sabbath day, and the religious leaders were accusing him of breaking the law. But Jesus's anger moved him towards life and healing. He didn't ever harm people through his emotions. He spoke life over them. So anger can motivate you to work for justice and truth. But left unchecked, it can also motivate you to harm yourself or someone else. So again, if this is if this is a concern for you, I encourage you not to bury your anger, but find someone you can talk and work it through in a healthy way. Because when we bury our emotions, we only bury them alive. They'll show up in other ways. So the best way to reduce the intensity of anger in your body is relaxation techniques. But one quick word about your nervous system before I get into relaxation, because I think it's important for us to understand what it's doing in our bodies. So what I want to bring our attention to is the purpose of the nervous system. So our nervous system is responsible for regulating our body's internal environment. Its purpose is to provide the right balance of chemicals in your body, and it monitors and regulates all the systems in your body. So when you're experiencing hyperarousal symptoms, which are common with emotions like anger, you might experience an escalating heart rate, sweaty palms, tension in your shoulder. When this happens, your sympathetic nervous system has been activated and is secreting stress hormones such as cortisol or adrenaline. This is your fight, flight, freeze mode of response in your nervous system. So when your sympathetic nervous system is activated, your parasympathetic nervous system is subdued because they don't get activated simultaneously. Deep breathing, like box breathing, for an example, activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of your nervous system responsible for your rest and digest. So relaxation techniques help to inhibit the secretion of stress hormones in your body when your body isn't needing them to be released. So the first step to de-escalate the rise of anger you may experience, we're not talking about ignoring anger or making it go away. Angry is not as a negative emotion, right? But I understand we want to de-escalate the rise of it in our bodies. I find it helpful to identify it as soon as possible. If you've heard the term name it to tame it, this is part of that process. So for example, you can say, Liz, pause. It might sound odd at first, especially if your name isn't Liz, so insert your own name. But what you're doing is you're getting out of your head, so to speak, and making the unconscious conscious, as we often react from our unconscious brain rather than speaking to our conscious brain. The conscious mind is what we are presently aware of, and our unconscious mind is what we are unaware of, like how we may be reacting through anger in the present moment because of a memory which was triggered and not because of what is actually happening to us right here and now. Does, if that makes sense? Yeah. So when I have felt an uncomfortable emotion and feel it escalate, how I pull myself out of the intensity is to speak to my conscious brain. So it helps me when I speak out loud. I also live alone, so that helps. But I'll just say something like, Liz, stop. This isn't helping you. It pulls me into the present rather than perhaps continuing cough, cough, the 1 hour and one-sided conversation I may have just been having with myself and some poor unsuspecting person in my story who isn't even present in the room with me. And I know I'm not the only one who has done this. Speaking out loud brings awareness to the present rather than allowing unchecked, distressing thoughts in my mind to take you down a complicated journey and only continues to activate your sympathetic nervous system. I just think of this example of like if someone has a really distressing dream or a bad dream about something, like maybe they dream their husband cheated on them and they wake up and they're so angry at their husband. That's like an example.
That has full on happened to me. I'm like, I am so mad at you. And he's just like, I didn't
jerk. He's like,
anything.
what?
Exactly.
Why are you so angry at me? Bring it to the present.
Yes, yes.
So examples of relaxation techniques and suggestions to help with optimum nervous system functioning. So one of the relaxation, very common, one of the best ones you can do it because it's free, no cost to this at all, is deep relaxed breathing. And there's also deep abdominal breathing, but I'm going to focus on like deep relaxed breathing. And so in this context, what really helps, and I know it's hard in the moment when you're really angry, that's why I say speak to your conscious brain. Okay, insert your name, stop, pause. So that helps you, gets you into the present. Yeah. And then what you can do is if it's appropriate, like you're in a place you can do that, is finding a very comfortable spot. Don't position yourself in a tense place. Like if you can find a chair to put your feet on the ground. This is an example of grounding, hey? You know, I'm in the present. You know, I'm telling myself I don't need to react to the situation right now. Sometimes you do. I said this to Carrie earlier. Like if I was in a situation where I saw someone physically harming a child, I'm not going to go do deep breathing. I'm going to react to that.
Of
right?
course. Yes.
For their safety. This is like if you're in a place you actually don't need to respond. You know, you're in the place, maybe you're ruminating is what I was referring to earlier. Having those conversations. That's an example of ruminating. And it builds up. Ruminating often builds up like can actually lead us more to a depressed state too. It just, yeah. So all that to say, when it comes to this, one example I like to do with clients is boxed breathing, which is where like you place your feet on the ground. I mean, you can be lying down in your bed. That's great too, or on the floor. And what you're going to do is you're going to inhale, you know, from fill your lungs up, go to your diaphragm, right? Fill up your body, fill up your lungs, sorry. And you're going to hold it for 4 seconds. And then you're going to exhale. I'm not doing it well while I'm talking it through. I'm just walking it through with you. Then you're going to exhale and count to 4. And then you're going to rest. And you can count to 4 or to 6. And then you're going to do it again. Okay, another round of it. And I bring this up, Carrie, because when it comes to particularly those who have had a long journey of chronic anger or unresolved anger, your nervous system has been reacting to your cues, right? And so what can happen is that your body, your nervous system doesn't know the difference between very normalized kind of response through a situation where angry is a very appropriate emotional response, hey? Yeah. Versus like problematic anxiety or problematic angry, right? Yeah. So what deep breathing does, it is actually part, it's not the whole, Carrie, right? And so I say when clients have told me this doesn't work, it takes time and practice. One round of deep breathing is not going to miraculously heal your nervous system if you've been in distress for a good portion of your life or for extended periods of time. So that's why when I encourage people who are wrestling with these unchecked emotions is open your day up. You know, maybe you open your day up with a prayer, maybe you don't, but open your day up and just, this is a good way just to bring awareness, hey, to your body before you jump out of bed. Do a round. And when I say a round, like, you know, do the deep breathing, box breathing I just explained, do it, you know, 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
right? Give yourself a few minutes. You don't have to do it for 20 minutes unless that would help you. Take 2 or 3 minutes and do that. Because, I won't get into it too much, but our body also releases stress hormones when we wake because our body's trying to motivate us to get out of bed and get on with their day. So it
Right.
actually helps balance out the stress that's released in our bodies when we first wake up. That's how it's designed. Our bodies are designed. And then do it before you go to bed.
Yeah.
What a beautiful time to do that.
Yeah.
And then throughout your day, as you're doing your dishes, as you're at your desk at the office, as you're driving here on Calgary's wintry roads, a great time to do it.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's one very common example. Another one is drink a glass of water. Water activates the parasympathetic nervous system and also helps with your digestion because heightened emotions like angry and anxious tend to affect this bodily system in uncomfortable ways for those of
Yeah.
us who know what that means. So, some other common examples, and I'll just wrap this up then, Carrie, is reduce your screen time.
Mm,
Take regular breaks from work. I say, don't be a hero. Take your 2:15s and your 30 minutes, right? Like,
yeah.
take breaks from your job.
Yeah.
Reduce the screen time, reduce as I hypocritically drink a cup of coffee, reduce dietary stimulants such as caffeine. You can have some, but if you're someone who really struggles with angry, reduce your caffeine intake. Regular exercise, minimum 20 minutes a day. Grace for those of us who are living in this weather right now. I can appreciate 3 minutes might be the most you can do outside. Avoid stimulating shows and stimulating conversations right before bed is another one too. Like that, at the end of the day, that's not the time you and your spouse or you and your friend or roommate are going to be talking about some major conflict. Make a plan to
Exactly.
talk about that at another time, right?
Yeah.
Do your deep breathing, intend to talk about it, make an intention to talk and resolve that, but at a time where you're not bringing that into bed with you. I say this gently, bed should ideally be a place for a few things. Sex is okay, rest, right? Like that's a place of sleep and rest. It's, shouldn't be that place of conflict, ideally, whether you're single or married. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I would
Totally.
say to this question, respond to this.
No, those are all so good. And I think what I really love, and you touched on this, is it's free, it's within ourselves. It can happen anytime, anywhere. This is
Yeah.
it's something we just have with us. And this resonates so deeply.
Mhm.
Um, because I really believe that stress played a big part in me getting sick and the lack of
Mhm.
managing the stress and just pushing through. It took a physical toll. I also have a lifelong journey of anxiety. And like we talked about, like my brain has been wired a certain way. And so my response to things has been a certain way. And so when I got sick and I finally sat down with a counselor, I realized that my nervous system was running at an 11, like 10 being the
Yeah.
highest. It was just like,
Yeah.
I mean, it became so normal to me, I didn't even realize how high it was. Whereas, like a
Mm.
4 or 5 would have been a healthier kind of touch point for me. And it has only been relaxation techniques, deep breathing, yoga, mindfulness, these things that you've been talking about that really have put me on the path toward healing. And now, more often than not, I am at a resting 4 or 5 rather than the
Mm.
11. Um,
So good.
and it seems like simple work. It's not hard, but you have to keep doing it. You can't just do it once, like
Intentional.
you said. It has to
Consistency
be
is key. Yeah.
consistent. Yeah. So I'm so grateful for this question. I'm so grateful for your answer. Going back, anger is a really hard one. I think most
Mhm.
of us see it as yucky and negative and
Yeah,
shameful.
if you were taught it was bad. Yeah,
Yeah.
angry.
And I don't know that we have a lot of safe spaces to talk about anger in healthy ways, ways that connect us rather than divide us. So
Mm.
we may need to do a whole podcast episode on this one,
Yes.
but let's keep moving forward. Before we close our time together, I did just want to jump back to our conversation around grief and how hard it can be to know what to say or not to say in situations that cause pain or make us uncomfortable. Certainly, death and dying is
Mhm.
that place for many people. As a pastor, this is sort of a place that has become almost normal for me. I'm often sitting with people in this place of death and dying. And so sometimes I can even forget how uncomfortable and hard it can be for people. So I think we should name that again, people are saying things because they're trying to be of help and comfort. But when my brother passed, what I found most helpful actually was to talk about it. Um, it was such a traumatic event and a shock that I needed safe spaces and people to process what had happened. Now, this was not a story for everyone, and it was not a story everyone would want to hear. So I had to be intentional about seeking the right people who would sit with me and listen. No one was going to fix this. There was nothing anyone could actually do, but listening did seem to bring me the most comfort. And I think we forget the power of listening, not the physical act of hearing with our ears, but rather the activity of listening as an art form, a skill, something that is developed as individuals and collectively in community. Listening is relational. And I wonder if it isn't the primary activity that promotes human flourishing, allowing us to thrive. Michael Nichols wrote the book, The Lost Art of Listening, and he notes that the essence of listening, at the core of what it means to listen, is empathy. Empathy is the stuff of human connection, the indispensable stuff of emotional well being, he writes. Now, empathy goes beyond sympathy. Sympathy is caring and understanding for the suffering of others. But when we really listen, when we feel empathy for another person, we are actually allowing that person to be heard. We're entering into their story, which is a profound and rare gift. Brene Brown writes that empathy is the most powerful tool of compassion. It's an emotional skill that allows us to understand what someone is experiencing and to reflect back that understanding. Interestingly, Brene's research discovered that conversely, sympathy led to disconnection rather than connection, finding that sympathy and pity are first cousins. And nobody wants to feel pitied. I don't know. I don't want to feel pity.
My favorite.
Right? So I think the takeaways here are just that listening is a skill and therefore something we need to practice. I think that's a common theme today, right? This is intentional. These are practices.
Not one and done.
Yeah, exactly. And listening also is a practice that needs to happen in safe relationships with others. And the same holds true for empathy. We may not have the exact experiences of another person, but chances are we have felt those emotions: heartache, disappointment, frustration, loneliness. And from this place of human sameness, we can connect, extend compassion, extend empathy, and a listening heart.
Yes, amen. I appreciate you, Carrie, bringing it back to strategies because, yeah, are there people who actually are very intentional with trying to harm people with their words? For sure. We're not negating that people do go out to harm other people intentionally, but I think you're very right. I don't think that's the norm for most people. I think most people do mean well and are trying because maybe what was spoken over them in a similar situation, they're thinking that might help you. Maybe being told that their brothers in a better place was a source of comfort at that time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So with that said, this I really appreciate because I know you to be a woman of grace and compassion, Carrie. Is that idea of like how do we also, extend grace to one another, but also recognize we can do better. There's ways we can do this better.
I agree.
And so thank you for offering that today. I know for me, like it's I already think of people in my story who do this so beautifully, again, imperfectly, but do it really beautifully because they've experienced that in the context of a safe presence of another, like a therapist or a parent or someone. So
Shoot.
hello, Noelle. Hello, Noelle. Could we just acknowledge your dog right now because we said
We said it was gonna happen.
they're listening too. Your dog is listening. All right. All that to say, thank you,
Okay,
Carrie.
I
Appreciate
think
that.
we're quiet again.
Yes.
Perfect.
Um, I do want to close our episode today with a strategy as well. Okay. And I address this in my address with the anger question. So again, I just want to bring awareness to what mindfulness is. Even though Carrie, I've talked about it multiple times, it's important to be reminded of what it is. So mindfulness is a posture or state of non-judgmental presence. Okay. Mindfulness is about being present to your thoughts, emotions, the physical sensations you experience in your body, because your body is holding your emotions and your thoughts. You're being present to what you're experiencing without judgment towards them, towards yourself. We can often live very unconsciously, as I mentioned earlier, and unintentionally. So mindfulness helps bring us to the present moment. So the more we practice mindfulness in our day, be it deep breathing exercises or prayer or a nature walk, an intentional mindful nature walk, the less we become lost or fixated in our thoughts and emotions and can choose to respond in healthier ways through them. So the non-judgmental piece is very important because here as we often disconnect from ourselves because to be honest, we don't really like what we're feeling, hey? And
Yes.
when we're being honest with ourselves, what we might be feeling, whatever we're feeling at any given moment, we might actually judge ourselves for feeling that way. I shouldn't be feeling grief. My brother's in a better place, right? So it's about non-judgmental presence. So periodically, as I've mentioned, Carrie and I offer mindfulness practices here on the podcast, but you can also go to YouTube and subscribe to Reclaim-app to access other practices you may find helpful. And I know some people are just more visual if they're not watching this episode on YouTube. So particularly if you prefer having a visual or someone to walk you through a practice, Carrie has guest appearances by people and she leads many of these practices herself. But a simple one I would love to close with before we end with a blessing for you, particularly as this episode's being sent out towards the beginning of a new year.
Yes.
The practice is called mindful listening. I encourage listeners to engage in mindfulness practices to help you learn to listen with non-judgment and compassionate presence to yourself. If you've had experience with this for yourself, you are going to be much more apt to provide the space for others when you choose to be fully present to what is being shared with you at any given moment. So mindful listening helps us become more empathetic, compassionate, and understanding. Think of any time in your life when someone provided the space for you to share. What was that like for you? Mindful listening can decrease tension and can help you remember information shared with you, deepening your relationships. It also does not mean, I just want to clarify, it does not mean you are required to agree with what is being shared or even to fully understand it. It's to help you deepen your capacity to listen without judgment and help you reduce reacting or disregarding the needs of another. So this isn't like a deep breathing exercise. It's actually more instructional. So take what works for you. But first, you want to set an intention to listen more mindfully. This is something you might do at the beginning of your day. As I, whether you live alone or work it from your home or you go out into the world, set an intention to listen more mindfully to the people who come across your path. This intention is important because it provides the foundation for when you are choosing to listen with non-judgmental presence to another. It could be a friend, your boss, a lecturer, a client, or stranger. The next thing is you're going to want to mind your judgments. And I mean like be aware of the judgments and your urge to react or interrupt as the other is speaking. I know for me, I can sometimes interrupt someone, not because I'm trying to be a jerk to them, but because I relate so much to what they're sharing. I get so passionate. Carrie's experienced that many times. So even and we're not judging that, but it is good to practice holding reaction times back as much as you can with this practice with mindful listening. Be aware of what is happening in your body as you listen. It's a both and. It can happen at the same time. Notice where there is lightness and calm in your body. Notice when there is discomfort or tension. Simply notice what you are feeling. And if it helps, take a deep breath while you're still being present to the other person. Continue to remain in the present moment with the other, but take a deep breath if you want to help. As I shared earlier about the nervous system, you might start to feel tension. No, we're good. We're calm. Speak to your conscious brain quietly in your head. We're good. Stay present. Hey. Notice what comes to your mind because you might have many thoughts. and gently release the thought. Notice the thought you're having as you're listening and just gently release it. You can always come back to your thoughts at a later time.
Yeah.
Now is the time to be present to what is being shared with you.
Mm.
When the person has finished sharing, you can thank them if it's appropriate to thank them, right? There's contexts where it wouldn't be, but thank them for taking the time to share with you.
Yeah.
And rather than reacting with an opinion, your opinion or judgment, acknowledge what you were sensing as you listen. You can use phrases such as like, what I am hearing, because it puts it on you. This is what I was hearing, okay? And then you can summarize what you heard, because summarization is really important. This isn't just a therapy skill,
Yeah.
but summarizing what you heard may help the other can help the other person feel heard, and can also provide space for them to clarify if you misunderstood their meaning. And there's no sin in that. We misunderstand one another. So clarifying questions can really be helpful to do your best to be on the same page, and actually gives them a voice in their own story too. So yeah, you can ask them, how did it feel for you to share this with me? Maybe it was really hard for them. So let's honor that someone felt like they felt safe enough with you to disclose what they shared.
Yeah.
And then you can ask, is there anything else you would like to share? Yeah. So hopefully that helps. This is just one example of what mindful listening is.
Yes.
So hopefully that helps you. Great
I'm
for
laughing
strangers,
because
your spouse.
sorry, I'm just laughing because I'm trying to very mindfully listen, and I can hear my kids' watch beeping behind me. I can hear them in the room talking to their friends, and I'm like, I hope no one else is hearing all of that.
Yeah, I didn't hear any of that. And Carrie, you bring up a good point. This is about creating some perfect environment, right?
Yeah.
You might be in a place where you and your friend are working through something. It doesn't always have to be conflict. Mindful listening could be sitting with someone as they're sharing a dream they had or something they're excited about. It's not
Right.
always about conflict and disagreements. It's good
Yeah.
for all of these situations. And you might get distractions. Your phone might go off if you forgot to silence it.
Yeah.
Your house might be really cold because your heater broke and it's minus 44, right?
Yes.
Like try to do your best to be present. There's some things we can do to reduce distractions, like silencing your phone, setting a time of the day that's best. Again, I really discourage high stimulating conversations right before bed.
Exactly.
Yeah, so there's things that you can do, but it's not about creating a perfect environment, just the
Yeah.
best you can do. And
Perfect.
grace abounds, as we say, hey?
Yes, grace abounds. But you said you had a blessing for us to close our time and send us
Yes,
off into this new
yes.
year.
Yes, I did. So I really like the Irish poet and priest John O'Donoghue's words. And so what I want to do as we're entering into this new year, being mindful, some people might listen to this at different times of the year, but I just wanted to speak words of blessing over you. So receive what you are able to. You can leave what you need to leave as well. Yeah, I just want to provide this space to bless each of you as you go about your day. So may you awaken to the mystery of being here and enter the quiet immensity of your own presence. May you have joy and peace in the temple of your senses. May you receive great encouragement when new frontiers beckon. May you respond to the call of your gift and find the courage to follow its path. May the flame of anger free you from falsity. May warmth of heart keep your presence aflame and anxiety never linger about you. May your outer dignity mirror an inner dignity of soul, and may you take time to celebrate the quiet miracles that seek no attention. May you be consoled in the secret symmetry of your soul. May you experience each day as a sacred gift, woven around the heart of wonder. Yeah. So blessing upon each of you, our listeners. May you choose to listen well to your own story and extend that same gift, that same spirit of hospitality to the people who come your way.
Amen. Blessings, friends.